Yeah, so this study was actually combining three different studies and to try to understand what the activity is of T-DXd or trastuzumab deruxtecan in patients who have active HER2-positive breast cancer brain metastases, and basically showed that T-DXd in fact does have substantial activity. About two-thirds of patients had a CNS response. So this study looked at patients who have active brain metastases, 37 patients included in this combined analysis. And we found is that about two-thirds of patients achieved a objective response in the brain, in their brain metastases. Over 80% of patients had clinical benefit. So I think that the data are very interesting and they support the idea of using T-DXd in patients who have brain metastases. Importantly, this was actually a fairly heavily pretreated population, median of 3 prior lines of therapy for their metastatic disease. So it tells us that T-DXd can work even in refractory patients. Yeah, so it's hard to do prospective trials or even retrospective analyses of patients with brain metastases because there aren't so many patients eligible for trials, or the trials might be limited to a specific geographic location. And so I think this collaboration really allowed us to pull multiple data sets together to have really a more robust idea of the activity of T-DXd in this patient population. And it really came about through discussions with the leadership at MedSeer and with Dr. Javier Cotes, and then the group in Austria, who has actually been very instrumental in a lot of the ADC brain met trials, so Rupert Barsh and Matthias Preisser. And so we all got together and thought it would be really cool to pool the data. And it took a while for all of the agreements to go through to do that, but finally we were able to manage that, and it's been a really fun collaboration. I think that for specific clinical scenarios, these kinds of collaborations are super important because it allows us to aggregate data from smaller studies and be more certain of the results. There are obviously MedSeer is involved in many other kinds of collaborations on a larger scale, and those are also, I think, really critical. It also just really brings oncologists across the world together, which I think is also very important as we think about treatment guidelines, treatment pathways, understanding practice patterns, and just that communication is so important. So I think this, in combination with the data that we've seen from Destiny Breast 12, which also showed very high response rates in the brain to T-DXd, I think firmly established that T-DXd has intracranial activity and that we can use it to treat patients with brain metastases in the clinic as part of our standard of care. And I think the other important lesson from this is that antibody drug conjugates can work in the brain, even though we thought for many years they might not be able to work in the brain. And that means that other antibody drug conjugates, I think, should be studied in this space as well. And so for patients with HER2-positive breast cancer, we now have a number of good options. So we have T-DXd, we have the HER2-CLIMB option with tucatinib, capecitabine, trastuzumab. But despite that, most patients ultimately progress through both T-DXd and tucatinib. So in HER2-positive patients, I think the challenge is what's next? What other regimens can we offer? And people often live for many years, and so they do need sequential active therapies. For HER2-negative patients, unfortunately, we don't really have as many active therapies. T-DXd is probably active also in patients with HER2-low brain metastases. We've seen that in the DEBRA trial. But we really have much more limited options for patients with HER2-negative brain metastases, and that's where I do actually think that studying other antibody drug conjugates in that space will be very fruitful.